All right. So we're going to complete chapter 3, Living with Other Species. This is part 2. So we have a lot to talk about today. We're going to complete the information about infectious diseases. But we'll also talk about, other natural problems such as toxins. We'll go into that. We're going to also talk about radiation. So we have a lot to talk about. So here we have, and this is going to be your assignment this week. So I will post that in a little bit. And well, there's the assignment. Sorry, here are the competencies. All of these, of course, will be available online. So here's a bunch of terms. And again, so we were talking about, are all infectious agents the same? And yeah, that Purell is going to kill that 99.9% of germs. So hopefully you're beginning to wonder about this stuff and alcohol-based hand sanitizers, right? Okay. So yeah, again, what is a germ and what does this thing do? Continuing on that theme, we're going to talk about, now we're going to go into the body's defense against the pathogens because this is important. It's not all about them. We are surrounded by all kinds of pathogens all the time. Breathing them in, we're ingesting them whenever we get a scratch in our skin. Our first line of defense. Okay, our borders have been breached and we would be we are at risk, a great risk, without our body's defenses intact. So we're going to talk about that, and we're going to continue with all of these other topics yet, and then finish up infectious diseases, moving to radiation. Okay, so here's what the body has to do. Now you have a lot of things in place. I think I mentioned your skin, first line of defense, and you've got lots of barriers in place. And in fact, mucus is like fly paper. It traps all kinds of microorganisms and other particulate matter that could be a pollutant, for example. You also have tears and perspiration. That contains a lot of chemicals that will damage a lot of microorganisms, especially certain kinds of bacteria. But I'm especially going to talk about what our body does, how we learn to recognize certain invaders, and how we then get prepared to fight them if they ever come back. So we get better and better with each exposure, okay? So, when it comes to the immune system, what that's supposed to do is it's supposed to do a lot of, it's supposed to do surveillance and look around for something that doesn't belong there and recognize it again as something not self, non-self. This could be a virus or bacteria or a cell that has gone wrong, become cancerous, okay? So it has to be able to distinguish self from non-self or foreign and then take it out in some way, destroy it, okay? So when we talk about active immunity, now this is a process where the body learns and gets better and better with each exposure. It gets better at determining what's an invader and fights it more and more strongly with every exposure. It can get so good at it, in fact, you may probably, hopefully, never get symptoms the next time around. It just depends. So, okay, so active immunity on the first exposure to the antigen. Now, what an antigen is anything that generates little antibodies. Okay, these little things would be here. So an antigen would be something like a bacterial antigen. It's foreign. Anything that's foreign, it would be an antigen. It will generate antibodies. Bacteria and viruses and, well, unfortunately, other things as well. So this is an antigen. So it's anything that produces antibodies. So the body comes in contact with the bacteria and okay, so now the bacteria produces antibodies, these little Y-shaped proteins here. And I'll go into detail about these a little bit. So this is what you do, and you get better and better at producing antibodies. Now, your body does a whole lot more, and we just don't have time to cover this. So take my microbiology class at Clarkson. I spend more time not just talking about, I not only talk about microorganisms, but I spend a lot of time talking about the body's defenses. And I can only just talk about a few things. So sorry about that. If you want more, just email me. So again, your body comes in contact with the invader, it makes antibodies, and hopefully it remembers. It makes something called memory cells at the first exposure. So again, by this, if it ever comes back again, like the bacterial antigen or virus, and it comes back again, you have memory cells and they remember and they're ready to go. And again, hopefully the process will be so fast the second time around that you don't get a symptom. Okay? Now, symptoms, and where do you get symptoms from when you get an infectious agent? Well, it's true. Some organisms, bacteria, and parasites will sometimes produce toxins, and yeah, that will do direct damage to cells. But a lot of your symptoms are going to be caused by your immune response. You have a big battle going on. You have all your white blood cells and other factors are going to be rushing to the area, releasing biological weapons. So it's going to be a battlefield. Do you think that some of your innocent cells are going to be hurt in the battle? Oh, yeah. And you're going to get a lot of symptoms. You know, the redness and the swelling and the pain because of that swelling. And, you know, if it's in the respiratory tract, you'll get mucus and coughing. If it's in the digestive tract, you'll get diarrhea and stomach cramps and things like this. But this is because there's a battle going on. This is what your immune system can do. It's usually most symptoms are caused because of the immune response and something called inflammation. Inflammation, think of inflammation as, the battlefield. A big war is going on there, okay? Inflammation, battle, inflammation. This is something that happens when there is an immune response, okay? All right, so let's spend a little bit of time. I have to talk about the nuts and bolts, otherwise the next material will not make the slightest bit of sense to you. So again, when your body is exposed to a pathogen, there we go, little green bacterial organism. Hopefully you have a white blood cell or lymphocyte that will be able to respond to it specifically. And particularly the kinds of lymphocytes that produce antibodies, and these would be called B lymphocytes. So this is a B lymphocyte here, and this B lymphocyte has been educated, and it makes one kind of antibody, and that antibody will match up to the pathogen, hopefully. So I'm just having the match look like, green to green. But this B lymphocyte then will make little antibodies to dock up to the antigen, the bacterial organism. Now, what I wanted to mention also is that when there is an invader, there's lots of other things going around, and your body will make other chemicals, and a lot of them, now antibodies are little proteins, little tiny proteins that are designed specifically to attach to a particular invader. But your body will make other things. The body makes other defense weapons, usually proteins, in addition to antibodies. And I have them here just to tell you that there are more things going on. There's just not enough time. All I can really talk about is antigens and antibodies. So antigen, antibodies. And again, antibodies are made by a type of B lymphocyte. Okay, if in immunology you learned it's probably a plasma cell, but this will work. Okay, so again, these antibodies hopefully will attach to the antigen, the antibody, or the invader. And once they attach to the invader, well, now they're labeled for destruction. Antibodies, this little white Y-shaped proteins, do not directly destroy the invader, the little non-self antigen here. They label it for destruction. It's a big military action. It is. It's a big battle. Lots of other cells are also involved in this process. So once you have your antigen all tagged with antibodies, ready to be, it's tagged for destruction, the next thing that happens is, okay, you have a phagocyte coming through. And phagocytes can be things like macrophages and neutrophils. And what they do is, if there's a little antibody sticking out, they will attach to that. And that's a signal then to the phagocyte. It's a way to capture the little bacterial cell. It's easy to capture if there's a little antibody stuck on it. And then once they all stick together, the phagocyte says, okay, time to take it in. and they bring it in by a process called phagocytosis. And once inside, they pretty much digest it. Okay. So it's broken down. So this is one way to get rid of a bacterial cell. And again, there's so much more to this, but we'll just talk about antibodies and antigens. Okay. So that is the role of the antibodies and the antigens. Now, again, with the first exposure, hopefully you'll make other kinds of white blood cells called memory cells. For example, a memory B lymphocyte. So it remembers that there was this little green particle that was an invader. So this particular type of cell is loaded with factories, and these factories inside will manufacture tons and tons of special antibodies very, very, very quickly. So quickly, again, so quickly, and just they'll attach to the invader and label it for destruction very quickly. So hopefully your immune system, after the battle, okay, after the first war, you'll make memory cells. This is big. And there are other kinds of memory cells other than memory B lymphocytes. There's also memory T lymphocytes, which we do not have time to talk about. But just know memory B cells or memory B lymphocytes, okay? So again, if it comes back, fast production. Fast. We're talking just a few days to make enough antibodies. And again, it remembers fast. Okay. How long does it take for the body to mount a strong immune response, to get a strong military action going? Well, it takes about 7 to 10 days to make enough antibodies to label the invader for destruction. So, well, because, all military actions take a lot of coordination here. And your factories have to make arms, okay, like antibodies. So it takes a little while, 7 to 10 days. How long do we take antibiotics? Oh, 7 to 10 days, yeah. Because, all right, if you can mount a good enough immune response, you don't need antibiotic drugs, right? But if you can't make a strong enough immune response, then you take antibiotic drugs. And you take antibiotic drugs until the body is able to kick in and make their own strong immune response and make antibodies. Okay? So antibiotics, that's a drug we prescribe to patients who can't make enough antibodies or good enough antibodies quick enough. And then the patient gets very, very sick. Okay, so we take antibiotics until the body's immune system catches up. And again, during this time, you're going to have symptoms. It's a battle going on. You're going to have inflammation. You're going to have swellings, pain, runny nose, diarrhea, things like this. So we take antibiotics until the antibodies take over. Now, once the antibodies are released, now there's lots of different kinds of antibodies. I'm only going to talk about 4 of them. The first, and another thing to mention, a fancy way of saying antibody is immunoglobulin. It's what people who have been overeducated call them. But antibodies is so much easier to say, isn't it? But we still abbreviate the types of antibodies as a capital I, a little g, and then the class is the next letter. So the first time you've been exposed to a invader, usually make a lot of these guys called IgGs. And second time you meet an invader, you make a lot of IgGs. If you have a parasite, you make IgEs. And if we're talking about breast milk or mucus, something that, let's say you had a dental disease, an oral disease, or an sexually infectious disease, okay, then we're talking mucosal membranes. Then we talk about IgAs. Also, IgAs are found in breast milk. So different antibodies, in your serum will tell you a little bit about what's going on with your patient. Okay, what is it? Is this the first response, second response? And now these antibodies don't last for long because things get shut down. For example, the IgM antibodies, the first ones in, they last about 5 to 8 days. The IgGs, they're common in the blood. They last about 20 days. So they're not around for very long, but hopefully it's long enough to label the invader for destruction so you don't get any more symptoms and you're good, and hopefully you've made memory cells. But until then, again, this is you're going to have a battle. The first exposure, big battle, big inflammatory response, lots of symptoms. So you're going to get this. Okay, takes a while. So, okay. Hey, wouldn't it be nice just to be able to make antibodies really, really fast, so fast that you never get symptoms or disease? I mean, just to have all those antibodies there and ready, or have them produced very, very quickly so that you never get disease. Is there a way medically we could do this? And especially do this in such a way that maybe you'd never even have to take an antibiotic, because of course all drugs have side effects. And we'd rather not have to be on a drug if we didn't need to be on a drug. But yeah, if we just had some other defense. Well, there is one thing you could do. You could buy something like this called an immunoglobulin that is pre-made. Sometimes we call them gamma globulins. It's just a bottle full of pre-made little antibodies. But this is a temporary fix. Usually this is just going to last a few weeks. So these are pre-made antibodies. They are short-term. You didn't make memory cells because you never had the battle yourself. You have to have the battle to make the memory cells to get long-term protection. Somebody gives you preformed antibodies, yeah, it's not going to be much of a, it's not going to be very helpful later on. So for example, if you are exposed to tetanus, they'll give you preformed antibodies that will attach to, actually it's the tetanus toxin, okay? But if you ever get exposed again, they'll have to give you more of this, okay? Because you're not making memory. Okay, your body, only when your body goes through the battle do you make memory cells, and then only then are you protected. Okay, so the antibody's already prepared. And again, we call this gamma globulin. So if you've ever been unfortunate enough to get a needle stick, they have probably given you gamma globulin against all the bloodborne pathogens, including hepatitis. So there you go. Oh, here's something else. Why not a vaccine? Well, okay, so what is this exactly? So if I give you little bits and pieces, or the little antigen, I just inject that into you, or have you swallow it or inhale it, well, then your body thinks it's the real deal, and you'll have a huge battle. And so active immunity, okay, will probably produce memory cells, right? And wow, if I can make memory cells without disease, that would be great. And then I don't need antibiotics because my own natural defenses are working. So that would be nice. More about, okay. So again, now these little vials would have bits and pieces of the pathogen, either a virus or a dead organism, bits and pieces of the dead organism, maybe the toxin it produces, but this will make memory. So did you think, okay, so if you've ever had chicken pox, you only usually have it once, right? That's because your immune system had it actively protected you. You made memory. It's not as if you never came in contact with chickenpox viruses again. Okay, you did. You just fought off the viruses quickly. You had memory cells. So you just never had a symptom. Didn't have to have a big battle. Okay? Oops. Okay. So here's another thing too. I just wanted to mention IgM and IgA. They have a short we call it a half-life in as far as they start to break down, they're no longer intact. So moms, when babies are born, they do not have active immunity. They really don't have any memory cells. So they are completely vulnerable to everything they breathe in and consume. And if they get an owie, little things get through their skin. So they don't have a lot of defenses, but at least for their gastrointestinal tract, they can get IgA antibodies from mom, from breast milk. And that will protect their gastrointestinal tract from invaders. So you know how they're putting everything in their mouth? So yeah. But again, this is only going to work for about 5 to 8 days, right? So short term. So, so the baby gets constant supplies of milk, but then when you stop breastfeeding, then the baby, has to start, you know, working, making their own, having their own battles, making their own memory cells. Okay. All right. Just wanted to say. So again, memory cells, this means that you probably won't have the symptoms a second time. You remember, no symptoms, no big battle, hopefully. Okay. Now, we're going to come back to vaccines. Yes, we will. But let's talk about allergies. Sometimes the immune system goes a little crazy. Um, it can produce, sometimes the body sees itself, little ID tags on its own cells, and thinks, whoa, okay, so this is an invader. And then your immune system starts to attack your own cells, and we call that autoimmunity. I don't have time to talk about that now, but I will talk about what happens with an allergy. So this is again something that happens when the body makes or when the body's immune cells make a mistake. Okay. Hopefully the lymphocytes, the white blood cells, and the macrophages, hopefully when something comes in that's harmless, they will be able to recognize it as, oh, that's cat dander, or that's dog dander, or that's pollen, which is just, you know, uh, basically plant sperm floating around in the air, or okay, these are dust mites, these are not or peanut proteins. These are nothing that's going to harm me, harm the body, so we don't have to have a big old battle. Because yeah, these are harmless little things. Yeah, they're foreign, but they're not going to start dividing and producing toxins and taking over, okay? Hopefully your immune system will know this, but that isn't always true. Especially with women, we are more times more likely to have little whoopsies, little mistakes by our immune system, and have allergies. So an allergy means that a foreign but harmless substance causes an immune system battle. So the person's immune system mounts an unnecessary response. You have a big battle, there's collateral damage, and you're going to have all of the symptoms. So yeah, because you get a battle. That's inflammation, right? Battle is inflammation. When everything swells up, okay, well, again, pain and redness and heat and sometimes immobility, a little paralysis. And it just depends on where the allergen gets in. So if you inhale it, well, you'll probably get mucus and coughing and all of a little bit of respiratory distress. If you ingest it, well, then you're going to have GI upset problems, cramping and diarrhea. If it comes in, sometimes it comes in contact with the skin, well, then you're going to have a type of dermatitis. But these are all because of battles, unnecessary battles. Your body doesn't know they're harmless, okay? And speaking of which, maybe you've seen something like this or gone through this yourself. But people who have severe allergies, a lot of times they will go in and they will get tested to see how they respond to certain allergens, either from tree pollen or grass pollen or weed pollen, something that's going on with mold or cat dander or dust mites or anything like that. So this poor gentleman, dear me. So yeah. So, you know how sometimes you're walking, maybe you've been exposed to poison ivy in your past, and at first you didn't respond, and then you really got a bad reaction. Or maybe you had a bee sting the first time, wasn't a big deal, but then the second time it was a big deal. Or you've had penicillin for a while, and then all of a sudden you mounted a huge immune response. Now, all of these things are not really designed to hurt your cells, but your body thinks of these as little complexes and something dangerous. So you mount a big inflammatory response against them. What's a peanut protein going to do for you? It's not going to really hurt you. And a lot of people blame penicillin allergies. They think that the penicillin is attacking their cells like it does a bacterial cell. No, 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 no. Penicillin just forms these little complexes with proteins, and then they start to look foreign and dangerous. So, okay, so here's what happens. You get the first exposure. So here's little cat dander symbols. So you inhale, you play with a kitty for the first time, and this is your first exposure, and the body says, I think these particles of cat dander might be a problem, might be an invader. So you get sensitization, and your B lymphocytes make antibodies. Oops, antibodies. Now, this first time around isn't going to be a big deal so much, especially because the antibodies that are going to be made are going to be unique antibodies called the IgE. E is an Edward. So, they're unique antibodies. And the reason for that is because these particles are so big, the body sometimes thinks that this is a parasite. At least that's what we think. So you form kind of parasitic antibodies. But again, it's not a big deal the first time around. Sensitization just makes special antibodies, but also it makes memory cells. So the antibodies to the cat dander, that's what happens, sorry. And then you make memory cells. So if the cat dander ever comes back, well then, now we're in trouble. So time goes by, you play with the second kitten. Now these antibodies that you made against cat dander, see I have the same color, okay, so I have them brown for the brown kitty. Okay, so you made these antibodies and they're circulating. What they tend to do is attach to a cell that contains tons of chemical weapons called a granulocyte. These types of cells are around especially to kill big giant parasites. And what's in these, they're called granulocytes because they have these little granules full of chemical weapons. These are very hazardous to cells. In fact, they kill things. But again, this is how we would respond to a big parasitic worm or sometimes a fungus or something like that. So these antibodies that only attach to cat dander are now holding on to a granulocyte, sort of getting it all charged up in case the cat comes back, and the cat dander does. And the second exposure then attaches the cat dander to the antibody that's attached to the granulocyte. Now this is now going to cause a trigger to the granulocyte. Okay, so cat dander attaches to these little preformed antibodies, triggering the granulocyte, and it releases tons of chemical weapons, one of which is histamine. Histamine does a lot of things. It causes your blood vessels to open wide, and so that all of the blood cells, white and red, rush to the battle scene. The red blood cells to give energy to the soldiers. The white blood cells are the soldiers they're going to be fighting. So blood vessels dilate, but that means then that everything's going to swell, right? You get swelling, you get pain, okay? And histamine does a lot of other things, and there's prostaglandins, other kinds of chemicals, but these are chemical weapons that are being released, okay, in little battle zones, wherever the cat dander landed. And in this case, in the tissue, it's going to be a battle. You're going to have inflammation, runny nose, sneezing, coughing, all of those symptoms, because your body doesn't know that this was actually harmless. So again, the first exposure sensitizes you, and you make the antibodies. The second exposure, then, the antibodies and the cat dander, all basically the allergen, all bind up to the granulocyte, causing these granulocytes, these cells, to release their chemical weapons. And it's going to have a lot of collateral damage. Good cells will be hurt in this. Okay? This is a little bit of another illustration. This is actually what a granulocyte would look like a mast cell or a basophil. So you make these little antibodies, and the cat dander attaches to it, and there you go. It just releases all these granulocytes. So there's a lot of things being released here, not just histamine. So, but we just don't have time. So there you go. Now, interestingly enough, the response to allergens is the same response we have to taking out big parasitic worms. This is a blood fluke known as a schistosome. You can't see it, but it is covered with little antibodies that labeled it for destruction. There's no phagocyte that can eat this thing, so what do? You have granulocytes, specifically something called an eosinophil granulocyte, that attaches to the little antibody and then releases its chemical weapons, and the chemical weapons will eat away at your parasitic worm. So this is a way to attack something too big for a white blood cell to eat. Okay, so again, this is a blood worm or a blood fluke, kind of related to tapeworms and things like that. We didn't have time to talk about them. There's just not enough time. Sorry about that. So that's a schistosome or a blood fluke. But this is how we take out big parasites. Now, sometimes though our immune response really goes crazy, especially in the respiratory tract, and you go from an allergen to a condition called asthma. So this is a chronic immune illness. And again, your body doesn't know that peanut proteins are harmless, shellfish proteins are harmless. It just can't distinguish it, unfortunately. So during an asthma attack, and you probably know this, the bronchi, the bigger, some of the bigger tubes in your respiratory tract, right? They become, it's always a battlefield. The white blood cells are rushing in because of the histamine that's released, and it becomes very inflamed and prone to sudden constriction. But it's usually more than that. So an antihistamine is not enough to stop this. So when you get an asthma attack, just again bronchoconstriction, the bronchi become smaller. You get so much mucus, you just can't breathe. So you need something like an inhaler, some steroids to open things up. So normally an antihistamine works for a regular allergen, but not enough for asthma. So why do we have so many allergens in Western society? Why do you suppose that is? Well, again, the prevalence is not well understood, but we do know there's a genetic component. Of course, environmental, things in the environment that will trigger your allergies. We know this is true as well. So like everything else, the genetics loads the gun, the environment pulls the trigger. But there's one other very interesting idea that is the hygiene hypothesis. So again, a hypothesis is a very educated guess based upon lots of research and books from many different disciplines. Basically scientists are saying, yeah, this makes a lot of sense, but we're not sure about all the mechanisms. But the hygiene hypothesis states that when we grow up, when we're very, very young, we're actually, as humans, designed to have parasites. Yeah, we are. Bacteria, parasitic worms, things like that. And we've evolved for centuries and centuries and centuries to have these things. And like our normal microbiota, they work with us and they train our immune system, make our immune system behave. But what if we lose what we're supposed to have, like our parasites? And like I said, a lot of the allergy attack is the same kind of thing that goes on with a parasite. So there's a lot of evidence that suggests that a lot of the rising cases of allergies and asthma could be due to the loss of our normal parasites. Now, if you're thinking that's impossible, well, let me tell you, a good parasite doesn't kill its host and list until the host is kind of falling apart, and then it becomes a problem. This is just to show you where we have autoimmune disorders, which is that would be also related to immune systems that don't work properly. And okay, these are in areas where you just don't get parasitic worms. Parasitic worms are called helminths. So are we finding correlations with this? Is this a coincidence or a correlation? Again, it makes sense. The immune factors that work in allergies are the ones that work with parasites. So I know now that you're totally grossed out, let's move on to transmission of infectious diseases. The next one. So how do we get these infectious diseases? Transmission. I've alluded to many of them. But zoonosis, we've heard this term before, and again, it's not zoonosis, it's zoonosis. This is any infectious disease transmissible to humans from other animals. And again, it's okay to love your pet, just don't love your pet. There are risks here, okay? You just don't want to do that. We love our pets, but I know we just started talking about the hygiene hypothesis, right? So I don't know. Some people say, take the kids to the zoo, to farms, and have them hang out there. I don't know. Um, Vectors, this is another way to get infectious diseases. Again, biting mosquitoes or maybe flies that have been walking on poo are now walking on your cold meat from your sandwich at the picnic. So yeah, you have vectors of disease like mosquitoes and mechanical vectors such as insects, that sort of thing, typical houseflies. That's a good way to spread disease as well. Fomites. What's a fomite? You can get infectious diseases from fomites or inanimate objects. So, okay, this gentleman is walking into the portable toilet and he's touching the doorknob. Now, that's assuming the guy just finished the portable, who just left, washed his hands somewhere in the portable toilet. If you want number two, basically, if he deposited stool and then wiped and had any of it on his hand and then opened that doorknob, that is a fomite. And then if this gentleman goes out and has a hot dog and French fries or pizza, fried chicken, anything like that, it's a problem. Okay. Speaking of fecal oral transmission, so a lot of infectious diseases are transmitted through the fecal oral route. If you've ever had what you thought was food poisoning, basically a lot of diarrhea, stomach cramping, GI distress in general, chances are you were exposed to fecal material that had bacteria or viruses that infected your mucosal area. I know, happy thought, right? Now, you can also have this happen because of mechanical reasons, but, a lot of times that's what's going on. So, feces can get on inanimate objects, they can get on vegetables, in meat, that sort of thing. And then if you ingest it, there you go. And it can, again, fecal oral, think of where they're replicating. So, you're going to get inflammation and diarrhea, inflammation of the GI tract. So, one person's infectious diarrheal disease becomes the next person's disease of fecal oral or fecal origin. So let's go back to our picture here, okay? So if the guy before had guy or gal, sorry, had diarrhea, okay, that could be a problem. And sewage, okay, and then you think about raw sewage, that has to be well controlled. We assume that our sewage is treated, and especially since, well, in Omaha, we're downstream from, a lot of other cities, including Sioux City. But, you have to assume that everything is being well controlled so you don't have any kind of waterborne disease or transmission. But if you cannot control sewage, then okay, you're going to get some fecal contamination of your water. Then you use that water to water your fruits and vegetables, and they're full of feces. And okay, lots of things can happen. So here's a little bit. Again, we call this food poisoning when you get a fecal oral transmission. So again, why did you get a bout of diarrhea? Well, like you don't have to leave the US to get bacteria, viruses, and even amoeba in your food. So, okay, the trick is make sure you cook your food or have something that is sealed and it was cooked very well, or have something that's very salty and dry. That's, infectious organisms don't like salty and dry things, but be careful. A lot of, street vendors, if you travel, again, it's tempting, but be careful. Most fecal oral foodborne illness comes from food handling. It just does. So, and just know that inner tissues of plants and animals usually start out sterile. It's handling, it's chopping it up, it's putting it into containers on chopping boards using knives, trying to keep it refrigerated, and it's not being refrigerated and kept cool. So it's usually something here in the prep. So microbes are usually introduced by their environment. Air, dust particles get in, skin particles fall on the food, water used to wash fruits and vegetables or water the fruits and vegetables in the field, handling and processing and storage. And if this refrigerated truck breaks down on its way to the restaurant or the whatever where it's going, then that can be a problem. Um, Again, be really careful. If you have something like this is porous. Wood is porous. And when you have meat products, that is very dangerous. Making sure that this is cleaned and sanitized is very difficult. So that's not a really good place to, you don't want to really eat your hamburger off of a wooden board that who knows, where you never know where that wooden board's been from, right? Or where it came from, right? And again, growth during storage, sometimes little amounts of bacteria and viruses won't make a big difference. But if you have a lot of bacteria growing and replicating, they will release toxins. So it's a numbers game, reduce, reduce, reduce. So let's say you have just a few bacteria and viruses here, but you take them to you're catering to a wedding, and the truck takes a long time, the refrigeration's not so good. This gives these microorganisms lots of time. So just, again, something to consider. Little side note too, when it comes to animal products, beef contamination is primarily from cutting it, either where, the meat packing plant or the butcher or who's ever cooking. Again, you can get contamination even in cold temperatures. There are microorganisms that are fine in cold temperatures, so you have to be careful. Milk is, when it's first made, it's sterile, but once it hits the cow udder, poor little bossy here. Okay, well, milk is a good medium to grow a lot of different organisms. Normally, milk can contain hundreds to thousands of what we call colony-forming units. These are actually bacteria, okay? Milk is just an ideal growth medium, so we pasteurize it, keep it refrigerated. And pasteurization is not sterilization. It's just killing the known pathogens and reducing their number. Poultry is really big, especially the way we raise poultry. This is another topic, but usually just in bacteria alone in the skin of poultry, usually there's 10 to 1,000 colony forming units per square centimeter. And just so you know, about 35 to 37% of chicken carcasses carry some kind of salmonella. There's just an outbreak of salmonella. Did you hear that? Yeah. Eggs, again, well, if it's if it's in the chicken, it's going to be in the chicken's digestive tract. And well, think about the route that eggs leave the chicken. It kind of leaves about not the same route, but close to. And there's a lot of fecal contamination from the chicken. So again, be careful. And the fish could be clean, but it depends on the water quality. Again, another topic. Okay, so the transmission of infectious disease and the basic levels of food safety. So time and temperature. When you have your food, okay, it's there, keep it either hot or keep it cold or throw it out, okay? Too hot, okay, well, if it's just a medium temperature, again, microorganisms can grow, reproduce, produce toxins. So and you want to make sure that you're checking the temperature to the center. And the bigger the batch, the harder it is to get everything really cold or hot, right? If there's a big batch of something and you're going to heat it up, well, the outer portion of the is, it's going to take a while before the inner part gets hot too. So it's just something to think about. So you don't want something 40 to 140 degrees Fahrenheit because, yeah, microorganisms are going to be too happy there. Replicating, producing toxins, we already talked about that. And, there's always bacteria take a little time before they take off and go into what's called log phase. If you can just get them really hot or really cold while they're in lag phase, they're not really replicating. They're really not causing any problems. Don't worry about it. I won't have a test on lag and log phase. Just we'll talk about it. But again, beware of buffets. Health departments usually have the most violations at buffets. It's really hard even with the sneeze guard. But little bits of skin, if you've ever heard, most dust particles are dead skin particles, and they'll also carry different kinds of bacteria. So skin falls into the food, and if you only, if the steam table is, all the food's really fresh, the bacteria will not have enough time to replicate or form toxins. It's not too bad. But if there is, it could be that it sits there for a little while and, bacteria replicate, make toxins. It's a problem. So beware of the buffet. If you really don't want any risk, then order off the menu and don't go to buffets. Better said than done. Buffets are fun, especially Chinese buffets. Okay. But I'm just saying. Okay, so what can we do to prevent fecal oral contamination? Well, water treatment. So before feces goes back into the river or wherever it's going, treat the fecal material, okay, before you send it back in the environment. And then before you drink it, you treat it, okay? And there are different ways to do this. Again, a lecture coming up another day. But what if you don't have a big facility to treat fecal matter and to clean up your water? Well, that can be a problem. So if you are in areas where, okay, what do you do for waste disposal? This is in India, and you can see the saris, the women's clothing, right? And it's draped over sort of a bit of a platform with some privacy, and you would pay someone to defecate in this area. So this would be like a public toilet. It's just you'd squat and the fecal matter would fall down either to the ground, or if this was low tide, the water would come through and wash it down river. But that means anything that was in your gut, microorganisms, is now in the water system. And okay, downstream, where are they going to get their water? Oh, probably from this source, from it's the downstream sewage is what's going on. So that's what they have to drink. So what do you do? What are some options to this when you don't have big, elaborate city sewage systems? Well, the book has an idea, and this is a composting toilet. And it is an innovative approach to sanitation in less developed countries. So composting just means that there's a natural process of breaking down matter, in this case fecal matter. And again, it's supposed to eventually break down so that you get particulate matter that is no longer infectious. And you have a little release here for gas. And if it built well and ventilated well, you don't have the odor, and you don't have the risk of feces with pathogens going down into the only water source available to that community. So this is something that is a possibility in less developed countries. But again, it's still going to cost money, but it's a good idea. Okay, and then finally, as always, wash your hands. So people, and you know how that is. We've all been in the stall, right? Using the bathroom, and there are clues. The person next to you, well, let's just say they went number 2, okay? They were releasing fecal matter into the toilet, and then they flush, and they leave, and you're waiting to hear that faucet go on. And nothing. They open the door. Or they just grab a paper towel as if that's going to make a difference too. So that's rather scary. I hope if you're like me, the minute I leave, I will wash down the handle to the bathroom. But no one in healthcare or the food industry should have this kind of behavior ever. They should maybe, I don't know, go work on a farm somewhere. I don't know. But you wash your hands. You reduce. Okay? Okay, so when it comes to infectious diseases, again, without good sanitation, again, you have to process the feces, process the water that you drink. Without that, most foodborne illness is going to be the fecal oral pathway. So that's, again, in countries that are underdeveloped, that's one of the major problems. A lot of children die from diarrheal disease. It's a major cause of death in developing countries for little children. They have diarrhea and they don't come out of it. I know. And we just think, well, don't you just take Imodium or get an antibiotic? Well, again, these are developing countries. So the children are consuming bacteria and viruses and parasites, and their little immune systems aren't ready to handle it yet, and they don't survive. And a lot of times adults don't either. Okay. What's another means of transmission? Respiratory droplets. Little invisible droplets. Now, this doesn't look invisible, but most of the time they are. And this is a very common means of transmission in developed countries. So coughing, sneezing, talking, singing. Again, invisible droplets can carry viruses and bacteria and sometimes parasites here and there. This is more common. You're going to have more problems in dry conditions. So the little particles of air, of droplets fly, 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 and they travel, 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 and they don't bump into water. If they bump into water, they form heavier droplets, and then they fall, and they don't get deep into the respiratory tract. So again, if you're taking in contaminated respiratory droplets, well, they're going to get it. The organisms will get into the lungs. They will start infecting the lung tissue. You'll get a battle, you'll get inflammation and respiratory symptoms, coughing, sneezing, okay, that kind of thing. Gasping for air. Just so you know, by the way, most viruses and bacteria that are spread by respiratory droplets are generally contagious about a whole day before they even have a symptom. So how nice. You can feel good and go and talk and sneeze and cough around people, or get very close to other people, and you can spread a respiratory disease that way. Oops. Okay, here we go. So again, why do people more often get colds and flu during the winter? And this is something that just came out, and I thought, duh, when I heard this, I thought, of course, it makes sense. They did a lot of studies. They were rodent studies, and to find out why this was. And forever people thought, well, when you're cold, that's what causes disease. Well, lower temperature might stress you out a little bit, but that's not the main reason. The fact that you're stuck indoors, well, okay, if you're around a bunch of people who are infected and they're coughing, sneezing, talking, singing, you might get more respiratory droplets in your lungs that are contaminated, and therefore you'll get more pathogens in your lungs, sure. But it turns out the real reason that flu and colds are more common during the winter is because of the moisture in the air. Like I said, little particles, if I sneeze, achoo, and it's invisible, but let's say it's real dry conditions, those tiny little invisible, they're called droplet nuclei, can travel, 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 and not bump into other little invisible moisture droplets, okay? They can travel far and get into the next person's lung, and then, and then they're infected. As opposed to a very humid environment where these little moisture droplets, they're invisible, and they bump into moisture in the air and they form bigger droplets. And then they bump into more little moisture droplets, and they form even bigger droplets than that. And then eventually they get too heavy and they tend to drop and never quite get down into the lungs. So this is a Harvard University study. You are welcome to go look at that. Okay, so why is it that some people do get sick, they succumb to pathogens, and some never get sick? Why is that? Well, this just does a good job of summing up sort of the infectious disease immunity lectures, okay? Kind of bringing it together. It's them against us. It's like every other battle. So for us, okay, are we exposed to the pathogen? How much of the pathogen got in? What genes do we have to help our immune cells and our overall general health? So, we depend on our soldiers. Okay, these are our immune cells, our white blood cells, lymphocytes, things like that, and other weapons. Okay, that means that our cells have to be happy and healthy. Good genes would be in these cells, making them strong, right? But then you also have to feed your cells. You have to take in your vitamins and minerals and all the amino acids to make good proteins. So you have good, strong immune cells. Your soldiers are well fed and taken care of. Okay, that's what you want. And if genetically you're good and you're taking good care of your immune system, good general health, okay, then you'll be very good at quickly making antibodies, making memory cells, and then you don't have to worry about it. You don't even have to take antibiotics anymore. But let's say you're not taking care of yourself and maybe you don't even have good genes. Maybe you do, you don't. But okay, then you have white blood cells, but you didn't feed them. You didn't take care of them. You didn't do what they needed to have done. Okay. So then you don't have the memory cells and it's going to take a little while. You're going to be sick for a while. So until the antibodies are made and you're going to have to take antibiotics, and then eventually your memory cells will be made. But sometimes you don't even make memory cells then. You know, some people go in and get titers taken. Well, they didn't make even enough memory cells to make good antibodies for the second exposure. So, yeah. And so then they have to again, rely on chemical drugs in that instance. So again, it's environment, it's genetics, and you want to feed and take care of your immune system. Good exercise, and there's a lot that goes into this. By the way, stress, on average, will take down your immune cell function about 30%. So you have to take care of yourself. All of those things that people tell you to do, you need to do that. But, you know, sometimes the pathogens even win, even if you have good genes and good general health. It depends. Now, they've got genes as well. Sometimes you'll have two different bacterial cells. One doesn't have the gene to even make a toxin, but the same species might be next to it, and the same kind of bacteria, like E. coli or salmonella, but it got a gene. Now, all of a sudden, it can make a toxin and it can make you sick. So let's say the first E. coli didn't make you sick, but the one next to it does because it got the gene. It can make the toxins. Also, some bacteria can make capsules, and that makes these bacteria invisible to your immune cells. Okay? Especially if your immune system is very young and you really don't have a lot of your immune system developed yet, capsules are almost impossible to see for young children. And their numbers. Their numbers are our numbers against their numbers. Now, you heard about LD50. Now I have an ID50 to talk about. And this all has to do with that reduce, reduce, reduce. Get their numbers down. Okay, get your numbers up, get their numbers down. So by your numbers, good, healthy white blood cells. Okay, feed them, treat them well. Get their numbers down. So there's not a lot that are going to come in and overwhelm your forces. Microorganisms generally have to have enough numbers to overcome your defenses to cause disease. You can ingest a few bacteria like cholera, and chances are it won't cause a problem if you're healthy. But get enough in, if you drink enough cholera bacteria, you will get sick. So how many would that be? Well, okay, we'll get there. So lethal dose 50, when it comes to microorganisms, well, it's a little different than what we talked about earlier. And LD50 is, when it comes to microbiology, talks about the virulence of a microbe or the potency of its toxin, the toxin that it makes. And this is the lethal dose for 50% of the host. So in other words, it's enough that would kill 50% of test or animals. Okay, so there you go. It has to be a calculation because we don't do this on people, right? but that's the calculated lethal dose, whatever would kill 50% of the hosts. Okay? All right. As opposed to the ID50, now this is the infectious dose, not lethal dose, but the infectious dose 50. This is the number of microbes it takes to demonstrate infection in 50% of inoculated test organisms. Again, animal models. Now back to Vibrio cholera that causes cholera. The ID50, or infectious dose 50 of Vibrio cholera, is 10 to the 8th bacteria. Okay, so basically the water would just be slightly murky, but not very. You may not even be able to see that there's anything in there. It may look fairly clear. It's just right on that cusp. But understand this is in what's considered for the ID50 for a healthy host. But so let's say you go out and you go to a place where cholera is found, and you're in a restaurant and they give you some water, and you've been, you have a little bit of, you've had some stomach problems, so you took an antacid that neutralized the acid in your stomach, and you drank the water, and maybe you didn't have this much bacteria, maybe you only had 10 to the 4th bacteria in that water. But your stomach acid, since it was neutralized, won't be able to take care of the bacteria, because your stomach acids that's a natural barrier. You drink something or eat something contaminated, the stomach acid will take care of most of them. But if you have a lot of bacteria, a few are going to slip through the stomach acid. So again, if you go traveling, don't take antacids. Make sure your water is bottled and sealed when you get it. And maybe drink a lot of Coke and tea and just acidic foods, coffee. So acid is good when you're traveling. Okay. If you lower the amount of acid in your stomach, well then the ID50 is not going to be this much. It's going to be a lot less. So much fewer bacteria are going to be needed to cause disease. But understand, if large numbers of microorganisms get into the body, sometimes you're going to get disease. The stage is set, okay? And you just don't even need to count. Some people, when they have a perforated colon, there's so much bacteria in that colon, there's no way to do an estimation, and you're going to get disease. I wanted to talk about a strategy for for protecting against infectious diseases that's very low tech but very ingenious. This lady who's wearing a sari, okay, this is clothing sort of wrapped and around as well, it's clothing, but very versatile. Saris can be so gorgeous, by the way, but that I digress. This is a very innovative way that people of India discovered for themselves. Okay, this might control something called a guinea worm. Now what happens, and again, a lot of people sometimes had to travel a whole day, well, about a half a day, maybe sometimes a whole day, to get enough water to drink. And women would carry the water back to their homes in a faraway village. What was happening, though, is there's these little tiny crustaceans, tiny little shrimp called copepods that would carry parasitic worms called guinea worms. And when they would drink the guinea worm would break out of the digestive tract, and the females then would travel through the body and then wait for the host to come back to the water. And then she would break out in a little blister and then wiggle away and go find another copepod or little tiny shrimp-like creature. The health people in like the World Health Organization, by the way, did a really poor job communicating to these people and really helping them. They should have been involved in how to solve this. They were just trying to tell these women not to get water this way. But it was a ritual, and sometimes this is the way women kind of got together with one another. So this was their socializing, their way to socialize. So they said, okay, so the worm is going to be in tiny little shrimp, right? They're like, yeah. Is the shrimp big enough that we could filter it? Okay, maybe. And they're like, fine. So what they did was they folded a sari once, twice, 3 times, so you have multiple layers, and they just run the water through the sari. And then any contaminated copepods, which are bigger than bacteria or viruses or anything like that, they would get caught in the fabric. Now, again, this only works for big things, but so it's kind of a rough filtration system. Because of that, the guinea worm is pretty much on its way out. It's almost becoming extinct. So hooray! But this is a good example of what can be achieved if you work with the community and you get a clue as to what's going on in their society. Okay, there are certain norms that maybe you don't want to mess with. You don't need to mess with it. So, okay. Okay, some other strategies for managing transmission of disease. Okay, so number 1, segregation of sick or exposed people. It makes sense if someone is sick or maybe at risk, they were exposed, we'll keep them away from the public. So isolation means, all right, you just separate people who have an infectious illness. Makes sense. We tell people with influenza, stay home, right? All right, quarantine, well, this is a little different. This means that we separate people who've been exposed to an infectious agent. So if you have been exposed to Ebola, maybe you were exposed to blood products or something like that, then we would put you in quarantine. Because again, sometimes microorganisms are infectious without showing symptoms yet. You haven't had the battle yet. Sanitation, well, there are certain health guidelines that usually counties set up that say, well, we're going to reduce or eliminate certain threats, but reduce, reduce, reduce. So this is okay. How about vaccination? Oh, she's talking about that one. Okay. Vaccinate to prevent illness. So again, the whole idea behind a vaccination is to protect an animal without causing disease. Okay? Why? Have them make memory cells. So you're going to have to expose the animal, human or otherwise, to the antigen so that they can make antibodies and memory cells. And if you can do this, you don't have to worry about taking all those drugs with side effects because your own immune system is taking care of itself. All right. Now, understand that vaccines are not perfect. I know you're probably thinking, oh, she's all pro-vaccine. No, I am not. Vaccines are manufactured. Have you ever purchased something that was complete garbage? Okay. And you took it back and you said, okay, you made this very poorly. You didn't think this thing through. Vaccines are very powerful, and you have to understand how they work before you employ a vaccine. The immune system is very powerful. It can keep you alive or it can kill you. And a vaccine could do either. So a lot of consideration goes into vaccines. And vaccines, sometimes there's a cost that we look at. Okay. So if we have to have something refrigerated like a vaccine, it's going to be expensive and it's not going to last long. Its shelf life is going to be fast. So how are you going to get this to communities that do not have refrigeration? Oh, well, then you're going to have to put preservatives in it. And could you react to a preservative? Well, if you can react to a peanut protein, oh, sure you can. And there are a lot of side effects to the additives put into vaccines. That is one thing. So they are not perfect. No, you have to be very careful with vaccines. And all vaccine labels, if you look at the little piece of paper in there, they will tell you that there are risks. All vaccines have risks, just like all medications can have side effects. Okay? Some people, like me, I've never had a problem with a vaccine, except I've been tired, maybe a little achy, but of course, because the vaccine's doing its job to make memory cells, it has to trick my body into thinking there has to be a battle. Battle means collateral damage, meaning symptoms. Okay? Some people take medications. It's not a problem. I can take a lot of medications and have a lot of problems. So, vaccines are powerful tools, like with an antibiotic or any drug or anything else you take. It has to be considered carefully. And if you ever have a problem with a vaccine, then, okay, number one, shop around for another type. Did you know you could do that? Yeah, it's not like vaccines are manufactured by your government. They're more or less regulated, hopefully, by the government, but they're manufactured by many places. Sometimes you can even break a vaccine up if you need to do that. If you had a reaction to a measles, mumps, and rubella vaccine, okay, usually it's the measles portion, so you just don't get that one again. Okay? Oops, sorry. Now, a lot of people will say, well, I'm just going to stand out. I'm not going to get a vaccine because of herd immunity. So everyone else can get their vaccine, but I'm going to be protected here, and my child is going to be protected, and so that child is going to have herd immunity. Herd immunity comes from the fact that, okay, when you have predators coming in, a lot of prey, for example, bison, buffalo, let's say there were, an old-fashioned wolf was trying to attack the buffalo herd. They would form back to back and put all the youngsters in the middle, and then the adults who were stronger would surround the youngster and protect the youngster, even though the youngster couldn't protect themselves. That's where herd immunity comes from. But understand that, okay, this is important for some children who cannot get a vaccine or who are not protected yet. But it only works if enough members of the group are immune. So everybody this child comes in contact with, including other children, okay, they have to be immunized. Now, some children can't have vaccines for reasons I mentioned before. Maybe they react to chicken proteins, and a lot of vaccines are grown up in chicken eggs. So, okay, they respond badly. Okay, that's not a good thing. So they can't have that vaccine. Or maybe their immune system genetically isn't up to snuff. And for whatever reason, they can't make memory cells. Okay, did you ever have a titer come back as not good enough, meaning you don't have enough antibodies? Even though you had that vaccine, you just didn't make enough antibodies in your serum? Well, okay, is the vaccine's fault? Again, a lot of times it's your genetics, your environment. How was were you feeling stressed the day of the vaccine? Or maybe just genetically you couldn't respond that well to that particular vaccine. Okay, so we need to have herd immunity for those who really cannot have the vaccine. By the way, when it comes to measles, you need to have at least, and this is a statistic, 95% or higher of individuals around you have to be protected for you to have herd immunity. But again, if you go somewhere to, I don't know, Orlando at Disneyland, where you have a lot of people bumping into a lot of people, okay. Or maybe people aren't just getting their vaccines. Okay. Are all vaccines going to provide good protection? And sometimes it's true we don't, but a lot of times right now it's because people are not getting their vaccines. Okay. A lot of people say, well, I've had my vaccine and I'm okay, and I'm not going to get a vaccine, and I don't think my kids should either. Understand adults and children respond differently to pathogens. What it can cause a mild disease in an adult can be lethal to a child. Sometimes adults are just carriers. They don't even have a symptom. Or they can be infectious before they have a symptom. Or their symptoms are just rather mild. Okay, and in fact, the organism that causes whooping cough, Bordetella pertussis, generally, if it manifests at all in an adult, again, it's like, I've got a cough, it just won't go away. But to a child, okay, it can be deadly. And it's not just this bacterium. Okay, understand when you get a really nasty infection, what happens is it takes down your immune system. Typically, you're busy fighting one organism, and then others that you come in contact with can move in. These are called secondary infections. And sometimes it's not the original organism, but the secondary organisms that move in and cause disease. Okay? By the way, there are certain organisms that actually will release factors, chemicals that will cause immunosuppression or will basically infect and destroy your white blood cells. So they destroy your or suppress your white blood cells, your soldiers. So good example, and so you are very susceptible to secondary infections. And a lot of times that's not only where morbidity comes from, but also mortality. I can talk. Okay. Robin Williams used to say, sorry, rented lips. Okay. So HIV, for example, directly invades lymphocytes, your soldiers, and wears them out. So everything and anything is a risk to you when it comes to infectious diseases and cancers. Measles and influenza, measles literally releases chemicals to suppress your soldiers, and influenza does something very similar. It's very interesting. They literally make you immunosuppressed. So if you're thinking, I'm not going to get a vaccine, nobody really has measles, mumps, or rubella very much anymore. Well, okay, lucky you, but again, or you might even think, well, what are the risks if measles or influenza does come my way? The symptoms may not be life-threatening, but the secondary infection could be. Okay. Well, they themselves can cause enough disease to cause mortality. That's true. But the secondary infections are dangerous. Please understand too, not all vaccines are the same. Again, some have certain components in them, some do not. Why do they put these components in them? Sometimes it's because of cost, sometimes because it's effective. You need to have the vaccine, the part of the organism or the organism make enough memory cells. And sometimes you have to do things to make memory cells, okay? So for example, some of the types of vaccines, you have whole and living microorganisms, okay? Or we would say, but they are weakened. We call this attenuation. So for example, chickenpox vaccines and its cousin, the shingles vaccine. It's the same virus and it's living, but it's weakened. And in a good, healthy host, it should not cause disease. But can it? Yeah. It's weakened, but it's still able to cause disease in a very sick person. But in a healthy person, it should not. Okay? So the whole idea, now why do this then? Because it best mimics an infection producing the most memory cells. And lifelong, by the way, lifelong, that is a misnomer. You start to lose memory, like memory immune cells. Oh, when you start to approach 50, it's like every kind of other memory that you start to lose. But let's just say through your adult life, okay, you produce with this kind of vaccine, you produce the best memory cells. Not only those memory B cells that make antibodies, that label things for destruction, but also memory T cells, which we haven't talked about, which are the best at fighting viruses and other things too, okay? So yeah, so that's really great. But the thing is sometimes they do revert. So you can also get a killed or an activated vaccine. That means it's the whole organism all intact, but it is no longer able to cause infection no matter what. You kill this with heat, chemicals, and sometimes formalin, which is not a very pleasant drug, but there you are, chemical, but it's used as a preservative. And of course, it's not something we wish we could take out. But this one, it's not going to produce very good memory cells. You're going to need a lot of boosters, several doses, that sort of thing. So the protection is not as good as this one. But you never have to worry about a killed virus vaccine or a killed vaccine coming back. And by the way, so people who said, well, I got an influenza or flu shot and then I got the flu. Well, if you got the flu shot, you couldn't have gotten the flu, because flu viruses in that shot are totally inactivated. They can't come back to life, okay, unless you're watching a science fiction movie. But no, they can't come back to life. They can cause inflammation, though, when you're making memory cells, But you cannot get influenza from an influenza or flu shot. You can't. Now, if you did the nasal spray one, those are living. Those can revert. By the way, I never liked those. Neither did Dr. Belshan, who I also work with. And now they've taken it off. So flu mist, I wouldn't recommend it because these are living viruses and they will damage your cells, your first line of defense. That's a vaccine I do not like. Okay. Toxoids. Sometimes we're not worried about the bacteria. We are so worried about the toxins they produce. Toxins are proteins that can be changed in shape, make them in such a way that they are recognized as that particular toxin and dangerous, but yet it's not in the right shape to actually cause disease. We call those toxoid vaccines. But again, it's not living. They can't reproduce on their own, so you're not going to make good memory cells. Okay. And again, symptoms, we do this because we worry about the toxins that the bacteria make. So think about tetanus, Clostridium tetani that causes tetanus. The toxin will kill you very rapidly. It's not the bacteria, it's the toxins. We've got to block those. So with these toxins, we heat or chemically inactivate them, so they're then a toxoid vaccine. But again, no memory, so not very good memory, so you have to have boosters for that one. Subunit vaccines, well, okay, this is like bits and pieces of the killed one. You just find the identification tags, the one part that really mounts the immune response and not the whole organism. So those are subunit vaccines. But again, you're only using bits and pieces. You're not going to have a big inflammatory response, probably. Well, maybe you will, but not really a lot of memory, so you're going to need boosters for that. So the goal of a vaccine is to introduce antigens to protect animals from infection and from ultimately disease. But again, they could still cause disease by your inflammatory response. All of these can cause symptoms because they have to trick your immune system into thinking it's a real battle and to bring out all the stops and make memory cells. Okay? If you don't get symptoms after a vaccine, you just consider yourself very lucky. But these guys can come back. So again, you can get a milder form of chickenpox from the chickenpox varicella zoster vaccine. Yes, you can. By the way, smallpox is another vaccine that is atrocious. If smallpox does come back onto this planet, I'll line up for my next smallpox vaccine, but it is alive, and that is a really nasty virus. And yeah, some years back after 9/11, they just wanted to give everybody, all healthcare workers, the attenuated smallpox vaccine. And I was appalled. But this is what happens when you get people all worked up. And let's do something because of all the biological weapons they're going to use smallpox. By the way, know anybody that's ever had smallpox? Of course you haven't. It's been eradicated. It is off this planet. Why? Because we vaccinated everybody. So we haven't had a case. We've declared it eradicated from this planet since 1980. So guess what? You don't need a vaccine. Surprise. Why did they want to do this? Because they were afraid the Russians were releasing biological weapons, but we had no evidence of this. This is what happens when emotion gets in and logic goes away. That was a bad vaccine. But again, if smallpox is rampaging through your community, get the vaccine. Just saying. Okay. Again, patient tells you that they always get sick after a vaccine. No. Living vaccines only may revert, and usually in immunosuppressed individuals. Or, this could mean you were stressed out, by the way, when you got the vaccine. Stress will take down your immune system. Again, the vaccine produces an inflammatory response, and that's what you want to have to make memory cells. So you get disease, but no infection. Got that? Can you get an allergy to the vaccine or vaccine component? Unfortunately, yes. If you can die from a peanut protein, you bet. It could be life-threatening, so you have to have strategies. And again, this is another thing I do not like about vaccines. It's how it's distributed. When you get an exposure to a vaccine, you probably should be watched for a while. I know we just go into any pharmacy and just get a shot, and then we go off, get in the car, and go. What if we were going to have a bad allergy or asthma attack? How about, excuse me, how about anaphylaxis? Sorry, if you go into anaphylaxis, which is a severe form of an allergy, right? And you're gonna die. So if you don't have an EpiPen handy, and maybe a trach tube. So that's another thing I do not like about vaccines. They are very powerful weapons. They're important for community health, but they are powerful and they should never be taken for granted. Okay? Now that you understand where I'm coming from, I believe vaccines are very important for public health, but they are serious. They are very serious. Okay? Just like a peanut can be serious to somebody who goes into anaphylactic shock when exposed to it, and even then some, okay? It's even a little bit more than probably the peanut analogy, I agree. So again, ever bought a badly manufactured item? Sometimes vaccines have been made badly in the past, and that has given them a bad rep. The person who who discovered the vaccine for polio gave the company, the manufacturer, the instructions and said, do it this way. The company cut corners and people died. So there you go. And that will give you a bad reputation. But if you look up vaccine, you have a lot of information out there, and a lot of it is not, it cannot be backed up with facts. So you have to be very careful. In this week's assignment, be careful. You need to go, and you have to go to peer-reviewed references when you want to look for side effects of vaccines, okay? Otherwise, you're going to get maybe a mixture of truth with a lot of garbage out there. And that's the best way to disseminate incorrect information, okay? All right. Okay, so why don't we have, so you're sold on vaccines. You were pro-vaccine all along, and why don't we have a vaccine for every infectious disease? So that way we just make, we get a vaccine, we make memory cells, and we don't have disease anymore. Well, there are limitations. Number one, some pathogens can hide in what are called animal reservoirs, and we can't vaccinate all the animals on the planet, so that isn't going to work. Microorganisms sometimes mutate, and therefore they look different to our immune system, and we'll make one kind of antibody for the first exposure, and then, when they are first entering our bodies, and then they mutate and they change, and the antibodies don't recognize them anymore. The antibodies do not attach, so they change their ID tags, and this is why we probably will never have an HIV vaccine. Nothing mutates faster than HIV. Okay, and that's why you always have to have a different influenza vaccine. So sometimes you can't make memory cells very easily with the type of organism. Sometimes the organism is too strong in its living form. So you try to do a subunit vaccine or something like that, but it just doesn't make good memory cells. And you just don't want, you can't go to the living form because it's too aggressive. So you can't do it. Here's also one thing you need to keep in mind too. Some organisms, the reason that we can't make good memory is because some bacteria have capsules. And remember, that makes them rather invisible to our immune cells. We kind of are able to do it later on in life, but children cannot respond at all immunologically to bacterial capsules until about 4 years of age. So what kind of bacteria would that be? Streptococcus pneumonia would be one. Of course, it causes pneumonia and respiratory disease. There are Neisseria meningitidis and several others. Haemophilus influenza is another one. But this is, if you've heard of bacterial meningitis, usually it's caused by, or sometimes it's called meningococcus. There are lots of bacteria, first of all, that can cause meningitis and inflammation of the brain, but Neisseria meningitidis is the one that we have a vaccine against. So we can protect children because if they are exposed to this bacterium, they cannot respond. A lot of children lose their lives or if not that far, they sometimes lose their limbs. If you Google what happens during with young children and meningitis, it's horrible. But we do have vaccines for children to help them see the capsules immunologically. If you want to know how, why not? The capsules that bacteria make are sugars. Sugars make poor ID tags for our immune cells. We just don't see sugars, but we see proteins really good. So what the vaccine manufacturer did was they attached a little protein to the sugar capsule, and then babies and our immune systems can see them, and then it looks, oh, that's an enemy. We can mount memory cells against that, and then you have protection. So these are all the things, symptoms of meningitis. And by the way, when it comes to meningitis, you don't wait till the next day. You have to go in right away. Okay, right away. There may not be a next day. Okay, so there are symptoms in babies and adults: severe headache, stiff neck, disorientation. And again, you cannot wait to the next morning. There may not be one. Okay. And one side note about that vaccine, though, unfortunately, it does make memory cells, but it's still a little tricky. So you need boosters more often with that one. Again, we can't help what the bacteria have, as far as what their ID tags are. We can try to work around it as best as our technology allows. How about antibiotics to treat illness? That's another way to manage transmission of diseases. Yes, but antibiotics, of course, some of them have side effects. And also, the more antibiotics you use and abuse, the more the bacteria are going to be able to develop resistance. And this is a medical global crisis. And this is the thing that drives me a little crazy. Your book barely talks about this, and in my mind, there are a few, global climate change is a big problem, is a red flag. We need to do this now before it's too late. But when it comes to medicine, this is the biggest crisis that is out there, in my opinion. And you can look for other, other experts and opinion leaders, but I'll tell you, this is a global crisis. And it's because of the way we abuse antibiotics to treat illness. Antibiotics like penicillin, your K-Flex, your Z-Pak, they will not work on viruses. They will not work on fungal infections. They only work on bacteria, and some of them only work on specific kinds of bacteria. So good stewardship is very important when using an antibiotic, and throwing it into animal feed is an abomination. So we'll talk about that another day. Okay, but here's the deal. The more antibiotics you have in your environment, the more you're going to select for bacteria that have resistance against it. And it's all about genetics. You probably have heard of MRSA. This is methicillin-resistant Staph aureus. It really should read multiple resistant Staph aureus. Of course, we used to be able to give penicillin to anybody, and methicillin is an offshot of penicillin. But now people get an infection like Staph aureus, and we give them penicillin and later versions of that, and cephalosporins and other drugs. We cannot treat them. So then we have to go to new generations of drugs, and we have to keep developing new generations of drugs. But again, it's not just methicillin that this organism is resistant to. It's resistant to a lot of different bacteria. Okay, so what's the difference between regular Staph aureus and MRSA? It's a gene. So the resistant Staph aureus has a new gene, and it allows it to get away with, basically getting, destroying sometimes, or stopping the antibiotic. So this just explains how antibiotic resistance spreads in a person, in a person like a patient, and in the environment. Understand, the faster an organism replicates, the faster it mutates. Different mutations naturally will probably give bacteria different responses to antibiotics. So here's a bunch of bacteria. They all have different genes, all by mutations. Every generation you get a different mutation. Mutations are just random changes in genes, right? Some mutations will not help bacteria. Some mutations will even be harmful to bacteria, but a few mutations allow them a little bit of success. So let's say there is, so there's different mutations that give them different degrees of success. So if these bacteria are in a person, let's say they're in your respiratory tract, right now they're in your lung, and there's a mixture, and you're like, oh, gonna go get some Z-Pak. What is that going to do? Well, that's going to kill all but the very resistant kind, particularly if you don't finish your Z-Pak, by the way. But these are mutated, and they have a way to get around your Z-Pak antibiotic. So now these are in your lungs, and they're alone. So then they replicate. So now the population is not a mixture, but they're all resistant, and that's just in you. Let's go back. Let's say this is in your water system, okay? And a lot of fecal materials being dumped into your municipal water. A lot of fecal material with a lot of fecal bacteria. And again, the bacteria from your gut, they have different genes, different sets of resistance. And as everyone's urinating in the sewer system and urinating out different antibiotics, that just kind of leaves the resistant kind. So now in your water, you have a lot of resistant bacteria. Now this is an example of resistant bacteria in the environment. Okay, so I just want to stress that antibiotic resistance is not about you, it's about the bacteria mutating. They are the resistant kind, okay? So, why is one Staph aureus resistant and the other one is not? Okay, again, it's a gene. They mutated. So when you say, well, I used to take Z-Pak, but now I'm resistant to it. No, that's not relevant. Hopefully the antibiotics never hurt you. Okay, they're not supposed to hurt you. The antibiotics are supposed to kill the bacteria. It's the bacteria you carry that are resistant to that antibiotic. Okay? This just shows how fast resistance is exploding. Pretty much with every discovery of an antibiotic, really, no, there's no antibiotic that the bacteria can't develop resistance against. We thought Vanc was it. It took many years, almost 40 years, and 7 or 8 mutations in genes, but eventually the bacteria were resistant to Vanc, and vancomycin was what we gave people who couldn't take penicillin, or excuse me, what we gave people whose bacteria didn't die with penicillin. So if you had MRSA, we gave you vancomycin. This was the big gun, the last resort. But the bacteria eventually developed resistance against vancomycin. And all of these. Now understand, drug companies no longer make new classes of antibiotics, and they haven't since the 1990s. Because the drug companies know something we haven't figured out, and that is the bacteria are very fast mutators, and they will always develop a resistance faster than they will be able to produce antibiotics and make a profit. So they don't make them. They alter the ones they have. Okay, so it slows the bacteria. It takes them longer to develop a mutant gene, but the bacteria will eventually become resistant to every new drug. And understand, there's hardly anything that you're going to be able to do medically if there are no antibiotics that work. There go all surgeries. Okay. Back in the day, my grandmother used to freak out because little children with strep throat had about an 80% mortality rate. So this is not good. And right now, sometimes we go to drugs that are very, very toxic that we didn't even use anymore, but we have nothing left. Okay. And then, of course, some patients, we have nothing to give them. And that's where we are. This is a crisis. Okay. Moving on. Another strategy, if you have vectors that are transmitting diseases, pesticides. But pesticides, if you can see DDT being sprayed on this kid, I just shriek. These things can have bad side effects. So I'm not a big fan of pesticides. Okay. Moving on. Let's briefly talk about population level impacts of infectious diseases, okay? So again, many infectious diseases, we don't want them transmitted because not only do they cause regular disease, but they can cause cancer. And this is caused by many different types of mechanisms. Sometimes, for example, if you've got Helicobacter pylori that causes stomach ulcers, you can get a reflux, and the acids that end up in your esophagus cause a lot of cell damage, and you can get, and cells change and become cancerous that way. But usually the chronic irritation can cause changes in cell proliferation. There are some viruses that out and out cause cells to become cancerous. They change our genes in our cells, and our cells become cancerous. So known infectious causes of cancer account for about 18% of cancers worldwide. So liver cancer, you have hepatitis B and C. Oh yeah, there's a vaccine against B, isn't there? Cervical cancer, HPV. Oh yeah, there's a vaccine against that. Stomach ulcers. Yeah, it can cause stomach cancers and esophageal cancers. Helicobacter pylori causes, stomach, not only stomach ulcers, but it can cause stomach cancer. So again, we care about this. It's very important. And all of these rates are higher in low-income countries and even in low-income populations in general. Okay. I'm not going to spend any time. If you want to look at the difference between industrialized and lower income countries, take a look at that. But there you go. That's from your book. Regulating and managing infectious disease risk very quickly. Of course, we vaccinate. The CDC has guidelines. The states usually implement whatever the CDC says they should do. Hopefully the CDC has enough funding to know, okay, and to have the best guidelines there. But sometimes we cut funding, don't we? Government spending when it comes to health. Yeah, you don't want to cut that. Isolation and quarantine. Again, it just depends. Nationally, we rely on the CDC to give us guidelines as well as to implement the isolation and quarantines. But we've never had a major statewide quarantine. But if you watch the movie Contagion, you'll see a good example of that. Again, the CDC spends a lot of time with surveillance, and usually they work in conjunction with local community hospitals and the health departments. So, for example, a friend of mine used to work at UNMC, Nebraska Medicine, and they used to receive a lot of samples when there was an outbreak of disease, and she would determine what kind of agent it was, and then she would report to the CDC. Also, health departments, there are certain reportable infectious diseases that are reported to the CDC and to the community, and things like sexually transmitted infectious diseases are reportable. So everybody, there's a lot of information being exchanged. Of course, hopefully you have guidelines and good up-to-date guidelines to regulate how food is handled. So, as far as food supply and treatment of sewage and drinking water are also important and managed with the help of NIH and, many other organizations. Okay, poisons in nature really quickly. Of course, there are a lot of animals that use poison in self-defense: venomous snakes, scorpions, spiders, stingrays. You can consume natural toxins, and we already talked about the fungal toxins, mycotoxins, right? But plants and animal tissue can also have certain toxic chemicals. Beans, there's something called ricin poisoning. This is a biological weapons from castor beans. Puffer fish, it's a delicacy in some countries, but it produces neurotoxins. So I'm going to just move on from there. Allergies and asthma, we already covered that. Natural disasters. Really quickly, of course, natural disasters. These are, the biggest killers are going to be droughts, earthquakes, tsunamis, storms, and floods. So here you can see after the tsunami of 2004 in Japan. Sometimes also you get a meltdown of a nuclear power plant. So that's an industrial hazard as well. Sometimes it's hard to tabulate deaths and other impacts because, lesser, smart, I should say, less developed countries, sometimes it's hard to get those numbers. It takes money and it takes people to go in there and get those numbers. So that can be very tricky. This is a snapshot of 4 recent natural disasters. You might want to look at that because your reports are based on this topic. And that's why I'm not going to spend as much time because that's your job now. Moving on. Finally, radiation. So with radiation, these are just the basics. We're going to talk about radiation exposures and health impacts. So when it comes to radiation, radiation is energy, and it can travel either as particles or as waves. And even particles will move in a wave-like manner. We're going to be talking about wavelengths here, especially in the electromagnetic spectrum coming up. So more about that in just a little bit. Okay, so let's talk about radioactivity and radioactive decay, which is a source of radiation. When we think of energy coming off of something, that is radiation. But of course, there's some radiation is harmless, some of it is not. So we have to describe what radioactive decay is to talk about radioactivity. So you have different elements, so chemical elements. If you remember the periodic table in chemistry, there were some elements that were radioactive. And the reason for that is because there would be many different forms of it, which we call isotopes. So this all looks like hydrogen, the hydrogen element, and they are, but these are different isotopes of hydrogen. What's in the nuclear area is different with all 3 of these types: hydrogen, deuterium, and tritium. So again, some isotopes are unstable, and that makes them radioactive. So really, when you get some unstable particles, they shake and they will shake apart. The nuclear or the atom doesn't like it, and what they will do is they will eject a part of the nucleus. And that means they're ejecting particles, and that's radioactive decay. Okay, so let's talk about the particles. So sometimes what will happen is the atom, the isotope of the atom that's unstable, will eject what's called an alpha particle. And these are going to be protons and neutrons. Now it's kind of heavy, it's big, and it's going to have very little penetrating power. Sometimes the electron gets boosted out, and that's a beta particle. Now that does have some penetrating power here. So as you can tell, this is the body and skin and tissue. The alpha particle, when it gets ejected, again, big particle, low energy, not going to be penetrating, and is easily blocked. However, if you're thinking, well, then I don't worry about this. Well, if you ingest alpha particles, okay, that can cause cancer. Okay, so we still don't like it. Beta particles, again, it's smaller than alpha particles, but it's going to have, because it's smaller, it's going to have better penetrating power, plus it's an electron. So it has more energy than the alpha particle. It can go deeper, okay? And it can be stopped, the alpha particle could be stopped by paper. A beta particle maybe by aluminum, something like that. Now, when the particles are ejected from these unstable isotopes and they go, breaking away, well, energy is also released. Now, this is gamma radiation, not a particle. It is energy, and it is released in certain kinds of energy wavelengths, but it is very powerful. And so it's very penetrating, and this is when you need lead to protect you, to stop its movement through, if you want to stop it from entering, you need a lead suit on, okay? Okay, so just a little bit about radioactive decay. With the change in the number of protons, again, one element decays into a different element, and each different element decays in certain characteristic ways. So it breaks down, one element can become unstable, release protons, and when it does that, okay, radioactivity is released, but then it becomes a whole different element, interestingly enough. And they break down at different rates, okay? So when they go from one unstable element to another element while emitting particles, they break down. Now, when you have a quantity of something that has broken down to about half of its amount, it will do so in a particular period of time. We call that a half-life. So, for example, uranium-238, which emits alpha particles, has a half-life. So if you have a whole chunk of uranium-238, it takes, oh gosh, yes, many, many years to break that down into half of its, half of its quantity. So if you're using uranium, it's going to be in your environment for quite a long time. If you talk about bismuth, okay, a few days, not such a long time. So short half-life, long half-life, short half-life. So this also means, all right, so how long is this going to remain in your environment? Okay, so if you have something radioactive, you want to have something with a shorter half-life, if at all possible, but even that's not good because you still have to protect yourself. By shorter half-life, I mean by storing it, okay, over long periods of time. That doesn't mean it's less dangerous. It just means that it will eventually, you can store it and it will hopefully change in a way that it will no longer be a hazard to human health. Okay. So, as far as what kinds of radioactive material we care about, again, uranium-238, dangerous. We also worry about radon as well. Radon has about a 3.8-day half-life. So, um, and anything that they make when they break down, sometimes when they break down, they make another radioactive material that is also a problem and has its own half-life. So radioactivity and storing radioactive materials is a big problem. Okay, and this is just to show you again, here are the different radioactive elements or isotopes, particles or energy that they, actually these are just the particles, sorry. And this just shows their half-life. Okay, let's talk about let's talk about electromagnetic radiation. So this is energy in wave form. So it's energy, not particles. It's in wave form. Now this varies. So you've got big, long wavelengths that don't have a lot of energy. And this is like radio wavelengths. Have you ever, you know what an old-fashioned radio is like? Maybe you don't. Everything is, from the satellites. But from an old-fashioned radio, if you were in your car, you'd pull up to a stoplight and then you'd lose your signal and you'd just scooch up a little bit, you'd roll up a little bit further and you'd hit, the wavelength would come back down. You were in between the wavelengths and you couldn't hear the radio signal. So big wavelengths don't have a lot of energy, but we still use them for, well, radios and other things. But as you move up the spectrum, the wavelengths get shorter, 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 and you get to a lot of very energetic energy wavelengths like the gamma rays. We said that is energy, right? Okay, so again, the shorter the wavelength, the higher the energy. The longer the wavelength, the lower the energy. Long wavelength, low energy. Short wavelength, very fast, very high energy. Okay. When it comes to this kind of radiation that comes in waves, we have non-ionizing radiation and we have ionizing radiation. Non-ionizing, ionizing radiation. An ion is going to be charged. It's going to have a plus or a minus symbol to it, and it is going to react with other molecules that are just minding their own business and turn them into ions. And they will attack more molecules. As this is especially bad because your cells are full of molecules, particularly things like DNA and membranes and things like that. So yes, non-ionizing radiation. tends not to be as dangerous as ionizing radiation. Now, there are some exceptions here. So let's talk about non-ionizing for a minute. Now, non-ionizing, again, you can have some radio waves and some microwaves can heat things up. Your cell phone, okay, has non-ionizing radiation that allows you to see the screen. So this is at low energy. By the way, I remember when microwaves first came to be, and my parents bought a microwave, and my mom was so afraid of the radioactivity because she was confusing it with ionizing radiation. But no, it's just warming up the molecules enough. It's not making them unstable. You don't have any charged particles there. And in fact, because the microwave has this long wavelength, you have to rotate what's in the microwave because you can actually measure how long the wavelength is. So the wavelength would be between one end of a honeybee to the other. So if you have a little piece of food that you're trying to heat up that's rather small, between where the wavelengths hit, it won't heat up. So you have to rotate the microwave, okay? But it is not ionizing radiation. It's not going to release ions and particles and things like that, okay? So again, cell phones, microwaves, etc. Okay, so right there, kind of usually about somewhere in the infrared and microwave area. Now, if you move a little further, you have the visible light spectrum. This is where we see visible light. But if you move beyond that, you get into the ultraviolet range. Now, ultraviolet can cause some problems. Ultraviolet, and by the way, where we go from non-ionizing to ionizing is right here, where this ultraviolet, right within the ultraviolet spectrum. Now, there's longer wavelengths of ultraviolet, and there's shorter wavelengths of ultraviolet. Some of these wavelengths will cause your DNA to mutate and form what's called a thymine dimer. So yeah, so just because it's non-ionizing doesn't mean that it can't harm your cells. We don't want our cells' DNA being mutated. That causes problems, okay? So here's the UV light, and it's coming in, and it's causing a lot of changes, causing new bonds to form between two of the bases called thymines. And because they loop together, and they're not supposed to loop together, they're supposed to be looping with these guys here. They're supposed to hook up with these guys, A's with T's and G's with C's, right? But here, the two thymines, the two T's, are attaching to one another. So this is causing a mutation, and you're going to get a misreading in your cell. Not good. Ionizing. So, ionizing radiation is radiation that, when it strikes matter, has enough energy to knock an electron out of orbit, creating an ion. That makes it very reactive and very dangerous. And again, this begins right here on the other end of the ultraviolet spectrum. Now, you do get ultraviolet rays from natural sunlight, both non-ionizing as well as ionizing. But this is a reason why we wear sunscreen, right? But because ionization can lead to a lot of damage in the cells. And if of course, cancer being number one, but also a lot of skin damage, period. It will break the DNA. Snap, snap. You can sometimes, depending on how, if the wavelength is, somewhere down here, you might only get one strand broke, which is a little easier to fix. Then if you're on this end of the spectrum, then both strands will break, and that's harder to fix. Sometimes the cell, you have something called DNA polymerases. Sometimes they can fix it. Sometimes they can't. Okay, so by the way, those particles given off by radioactive materials, alpha, beta, and the wavelengths from gamma, here it is. Remember, that's just energy when these particles are given off. Those are all ionizing. They do this. This is why we worry. So we'll just go to a tanning booth, right? By the way, I should tell you, when I was going to the Great Barrier Reef, I thought, okay, I am so tanning up because I am terribly, horribly white. So I'm going to a tanning booth, and I did this knowingly. which is shame on me, which is why I'm always getting mole checks now and having moles removed, and that's so much fun from my dermatologist's office. They love it. They love to see me coming. But at least I went to a tanning salon that had some truth in advertising. They call their tanning salon the 3 Mile Island Tanning Salon. If you don't know 3 Mile Island, they had a huge radioactive leak through their energy plant. They had a nuclear power plant that leaked radioactivity, and that was on 3 Mile Island some decades ago. I don't know. Maybe somebody remembers that. So just so you know about the tanning booths. So this shows visible light and how far it can penetrate through the tissue, through the epidermis and the dermis, the UVA, there's UVB and UVC. We do hope that, our ozone layer will stop a lot of this, but not all of it does, especially if you have a hole in the ozone layer. But this is a little something about going to a tanning booth. It is estimated that half an hour in a tanning booth yields the same UV damage to skin as 300 minutes in unprotected sun. Levels of UVA and UVB emitted by tanning beds are unpredictable, widely unregulated, and much higher than environmental exposure. So please be careful. And this is where you can look this up. I hate sometimes to get information. That's the problem about science. It's very uncomfortable. I would prefer to be in a tanning booth, right? And I know a lot of people that feel so much better after going to a tanning booth, but that's because they probably have a vitamin D deficiency. They don't get out in the sun. So here's the thing, okay? Take lots of vitamin D3, go to and get a tan spray and stay or wear an awful lot of sun screen, okay? Just saying. Measuring exposure to ionizing radiation. Okay, so there's a couple ways that we do this. There's something called Gray's. Gray's measures the intensity of exposure or energy delivered per gram of tissue. Okay, and then also sometimes you'll hear sievert. Actually, you'll hear sievert more often. Sometimes they'll say, all right, you should never be exposed to more than 1 sievert per year. And even that's probably writing a line. But this is a unit of ionizing radiation dose, and it is a measure of the health effects of low levels of ionizing radiation on the human body. So I kind of like this. This is just an example of the difference. So units of measure for radioactivity. So you see this gentleman getting hit, okay, by ionizing radiation. So the number of apples that hit the sleeper can be compared to the gray or absorbed dose. So some of them are missing, some of them are hitting him. So this is how much is absorbed. The ones he gets hit with. So the sievert is the effect on the body based on the size or weight of the apples, because again, some of the ionizing radiation has more power than others, right? And can be compared to the sievert, which is the effective dose, if that helps. Okay. This is not really good. I just thought this cracked me up, so I was looking for pictures. This is how this is the Simpsons Guide to Radiation. A gray is how brightly cesium will make you glow. Sievert, how many extra eyes you will have after glowing. So I thought that was funny. Okay. So again, now as far as the impact of dose in grays also depends on how your exposure, how you're getting the exposure. So if you eat fruit that has dust particles with radioactivity, or you're inhaling dust particles in the air, okay, it goes internally versus externally, right? So that's going to make a big deal, a big difference. So internally, you can get alpha, beta, and gamma, all as hazards. Externally, usually you're going to have the larger particles only because they penetrate a lot less. So, so again, how you get your dose, okay, is going to make a big difference as far as if you're going to get sick, get disease. Okay, so speaking of radiation and disease, being exposed to a lot of radiation or ionizing radiation, at high levels, That can cause something called radiation sickness, which of course can be fatal. What's happening is you've got all the ions, they're attacking your cell molecules, making more ions, damaging your DNA. It can be to such an extent the DNA cannot repair itself. The cells then die through a process called apoptosis. You don't need to know that. It's a type of cell suicide. Cells can die in the central nervous system. So you can have anything from a severe headache to other neurological conditions. You could stop breathing, actually. Gastrointestinal problems, diarrhea, stomach ache, vomiting, that sort of thing. And bone marrow suppression. It can knock out your bone marrow, meaning you're going to be immunosuppressed. Also, with high levels of ionizing radiation, you have an increased risk of cancer. Of course, there's no safe level, right? We don't have a threshold here, but it will cause, it's known to cause cancer. You get the mutations, the cells start to replicate in such a manner that they won't stop and they will spread, and there you go. So cancers include, especially in the bone marrow, leukemia, but also breast cancer, thyroid, ovarian, bladder, lung, colon, liver, stomach, and non-melanoma skin cancers. Again, all of this because of ionizing radiation. Okay, if we look back at this chart, okay, so all of this from different forms of ionizing radiation. Okay. So, as far as sources of radiation, there is a lot of cosmic radiation and it is ionizing from outer space. But again, with that, hopefully the atmosphere is going to absorb a lot of that. You have your ozone layer, as we mentioned before, and other gases. So hopefully we are fairly protected from a lot of that. But one of the things that we have trouble with in this area is radon gas. Now, this is being released from the minerals in the earth, and it is a gas, so it's mobile, and it comes up from the earth, and you inhale it. Okay, remember what I said. If you inhale ionizing sources of radiation, this is bad, right? So radon is the leading cause of lung cancer among non-smokers and claims about 20,000 lives annually. And this is a picture of Nebraska by county, and certain companies that do radon testing, and they put pumps in your house to pump the radon gas out. They put this up on their websites usually, or on their pamphlets. But there are certain areas that are high in radon gas. And what do you do? And it just depends on your house. Every house is a little different. This is probably one of the reasons why. Now, as far as my house, it has higher levels, but it passes. Okay, it passes. But one of the things that I do is I always air my house out, no matter what the temperature is outside. When I come home, or sometimes in the morning when it's cool, I make sure that the doors are open, the screen doors are open, and I let some fresh air in. If your house is sealed up, but it's coming up through the basement, the radon gas is coming from the basement, it kind of stays with you, and that's not good. And some buildings, though, they are sealed in such a way the radon gas doesn't get in. So, okay, that's another option. So seal up your house, put in pumps to pump out the radon gas. Those are some of the options that you can do, but it costs some thousands of dollars to do that. So, yeah. So let's talk about some skin cancers and why you want to stay out of the sun and the tanning booths, and why you want to wear UV protectant, like sunblock, sunscreen, and use other products. Maybe even they have moisturizers out there that will also block some of the rays sun. But both ionizing and non-ionizing radiation does increase your risk of skin cancer. So just to go through the different kinds, there are 3 kinds that I'm going to talk about, and this is what I have to get checked on every time I go to the dermatologist, because I was stupid and went to a place called the 3 Mile Island Tanning Salon. In addition to that, also, back in the day, no one used sunscreen really, and I had some some severe sunburn. So, number one, the squamous carcinomas. So, if we look at the epidermis and the dermis and how the tissue and the different layers within the epidermis, okay? So, we have, when it comes to the squamous carcinomas that look a little something like this is in the middle, usually this forms in the middle layer of the epidermis. So, within this area here, okay? So when these cells are exposed to radiation, again, damaging the DNA, the cells don't know to stop replicating and can spread if not treated. This, so you want to make sure, of course, that this is cut out. And, usually they cut out the margins to make sure nothing else is cancerous around it. The basal cell carcinomas, okay, are a little further down here in the epidermis, between the dermis and the epidermis. This is the most common form of cancer. Doesn't usually spread, but does need treatment to be sure. And the more sun, the more cases you're going to have, plain and simple. And that's true for all of them, I suppose, for squamous and basal. For malignant, this is the bad one. Okay, this occurs in melanocytes. These are the ones that, you make the melanin, helps to give you the pigment, all of that. This is the most aggressive form of skin cancer, and it spreads very quickly to other parts and other organs because it's going to get into the blood and through the connective tissue and spread. And, you start off with skin cancer, and the next thing you know, it's in other parts and you have other cancers. So it must be detected very quickly and treated very early. This is why you get mole checks, okay, when you're my age. When you're your age, because you have information, you don't do stupid things like go to a tanning salon called 3 Mile Island. Whoops. Okay. One other thing I just want to wrap up here. Know that non-ionizing radiation also can cause risks of cataracts. So again, something in my wonderful later years, I'm starting to develop cataracts, but it's my whole family does this as well. This is a good reason why you wear UV protectant sunglasses, the good kind. Protect your eyes, okay? Also, radiation and exposure to to non-ionizing radiation, like being out in the sun, suppresses your immune system. Yeah, those little soldiers, the one that helps you to protect you from bacteria and viruses. And by the way, your immune cells, some of them protect you from cancer. So not only will sunlight produce the cancerous cells, but it will suppress the soldiers that are supposed to go in and get rid of the cancer cells. And this happens more and more as you get older. So just wrap it up. The whole thing, okay, number one, be good to yourself. Try to keep your stress levels down. Eat right. Feed your immune cells very well. Okay? Get good protein sources and vitamins and minerals. And if your whole diet consists of brown and tan foods, that's not good because some of the problems that radiation it causes free radicals, especially the ionizing kind. So eat your fruits and vegetables, the colorful foods that will get rid of some of the free radicals that can go on to cause more damage. Get rest, have good hygiene, have your vaccines, but be careful, be thoughtful about that. Protect yourself and people around you. Be careful about, again, keep in mind that some people may have minor symptoms and think it's not a big deal, but it can be very serious. So be careful about, going out when you're not feeling well. You don't want to be transmitting disease accidentally. Wash your hands, reduce. Keep your skin intact. There's a lot of good messages here. So hopefully, and again, have your radon levels checked in your house. Wear sunscreen. Don't go out in the sun, and don't go to tanning salons called 3 Mile Island Tanning Salon. That's it. So work on your projects. And that's all I have. You guys have a great week. Bye-bye.